Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my final review, looking at each team and how their 2023 Formula One season went. So of course, Red Bull Constructors Champions, their two drivers this past season were Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. And this is a head-to-head matchup that is very one-sided, arguably one of the most one-sided of the entire F1 grid. So in points, Verstappen 575 points, that's new points record. Perez 285 points. Verstappen, of course, world champion. Perez finished second in the championship, giving giving Red Bull their first ever 1-2 in the Constructors' Championship. Average finishing position 1.3 for Verstappen, 4.2 for Perez. And because, of course, Verstappen can't possibly finish higher than first place, this is kind of a stat that flatters the gap between Verstappen and Perez, as there's a hard limit of finishing first. That being said, to Perez's credit, he generally was not that bad in the races. The problem is what happened on Saturdays that led to the races. Now, qualifying. The official statistics will say 20-2 for the two races that where Verstappen was unable to set a time during a particular qualifying session. So Saudi Arabia, Q2 for Verstappen, Miami, Q3. What I do for these circumstances, I go to the previous session and I look at who was fastest there. It does give equal opportunity, and Perez had every opportunity to be faster than Verstappen in those circumstances, but of course he wasn't. So that's why I've come up with this 22-0 number. It's not because I hate Perez, it's simply the way how I deal with those situations. Qualifying gap 0.672 seconds, which is pretty horrific. I think the worst gap on the entire grid. For reference, last year it was 0.396, so it's even about 2.5 tenths worse, or 2.5 tenths bigger than last year. Average starting position 2.9 for Verstappen, 8.4 for Perez. So this really shows basically the massive gap, the massive chasm even, in qualifying performance between Verstappen and Perez. Of course, Verstappen would more often than not, to quite a large extent this past season, finish first, and Perez basically had to recover all of those positions that he would be behind Verstappen in the race, so going from 8.4 on average to 4.2 on average. In my power rankings, pretty obvious. Verstappen 1.1 on average. He was basically locked into first place, except for a couple weeks in the spring, where I felt Alonso was having a fantastic run of form. For Perez 12.2, which is a bit below average, a bit below 10 obviously, which is going to be about average. Pretty poor year, I think, overall. I think this number is kind of carried by his performance the first 5 or 6 races, but because the second half of the season, Perez spent a lot of time being ranked in the bottom 5. Now, taking a look at your more conventional stats, podiums, wins, poles. For Verstappen, 21 podiums, new F1 record. Perez, only 9 podiums, which is a shockingly low number given how dominant that car was. Wins, 19 for Verstappen, 2 for Perez. Of course, those were at the beginning of the season. Poles, 12 for Verstappen and 2 for Perez. Now, looking at how Red Bull kind of developed through the season, they came out of the season so strong that there wasn't really any reason for them to try to bring tons of upgrades to the car. So first 11 races, average qualifying position was 5.9, does seem low. It's combined both Verstappen and Perez's average together. Second 11 races, it improved slightly to 5.5. That does seem wrong. Yeah, improved slightly to 5.5. Verstappen did have a couple of races like Saudi Arabia where he started out of position, Miami too, so that probably helped bump up the number a bit. For points, the first half of the season was better for Red Bull, 452 in the first 11 races, 408 in the second half of the season. And a lot of that can be attributed to Perez. Verstappen, I think, it actually improved second 11 races and first points total. But yeah, Perez lost a lot of points, a lot of podiums. He basically didn't get quite a few DNFs as well. Japan, Qatar come to mind. The other thing for the qualifying one is that in the second half of the season, Perez's qualifying, while it still wasn't good, It was certainly an improvement from the run in late first half of the season, basically the first 5 or 6 rounds of the Europe, where he basically didn't get out of Q1, and that was like absolutely shocking. That was kind of the point where there's even start rumors about him being replaced for next year, despite the fact that he had a contract. You know, we're in December. Perez is racing for Red Bull in 2024. I understand why fans would want a change, given that we know that assuming Red Bull produces a dominant car, it's basically settled who will be ahead in the championship in those situations. So I can understand why fans would want that. That being said, Perez did have a contract, and Red Bull decided that there was no point in trying to break that contract, kind of like McLaren did with Ricciardo last year. Now, looking at Red Bull as a constructor and how they've kind of developed the last 4 years, 2020, 319 points, second in the constructors. Of course, that was the year that they kind of fell backwards into second in the constructors with a not particularly good car. Average pole gap 0.576 seconds, so over half a second off. That was an incredibly oversteered car, very difficult car to control. And they really only got second place because Ferrari built an absolute disaster of an engine. 2021, they kind of benefit quite a bit from the new floor regulations that came in. They, of course, won the Drivers' Championship, Max Verstappen's first championship, 585.5 points. Still second in the Constructors. Bottas was better than Perez that season. Average pole gap shrunk to 0.183 seconds, so still below Mercedes that season, but a massive improvement from 2020. Then we get to 2022, the first year of the new regulations, 759 points, first in the Constructors, so first Constructors Championship since 2013. Average pole gap 0.185 seconds, almost identical to 2021. But of course, the team I think in first for that statistic was Ferrari, who had a very strong season. Actually, I should check that, but I do think Ferrari was fastest that year. Ferrari were very good in qualifying. Of course, having Leclerc as your driver will do that for you. And of course, even after the basically the rules, the flexi floor rules that came in at Spa with the technical directive, Ferrari was still pretty good in qualifying, but they just suffered massively in the races. 2023, 860 points, even more dominant than they were in 2022. Again, first in the Constructors' Championship, average pole gap 0.131 seconds. So definitely an improvement from 2022, and they were definitely very quite good in qualifying the first 5 or 6 races where they were basically head and shoulders above everyone in both qualifying and in the race. But as the season went along, I think a lot of teams got pretty close. Ferrari got nicked a handful of poles, and Hamilton, of course, got one in Hungary. So basically by the end of the season, qualifying was actually a lot more interesting than the race, because we didn't really know who was going to qualify where. And it wasn't an absolute guarantee that Verstappen was going to qualify on pole. So really historic season from Red Bull, absolutely dominant. Definitely the most dominant season I've seen in my time watching F1 in terms of race pace. Not in terms of qualifying, I think that would probably go to the 2020 Mercedes. But still very, very good in qualifying and dominant in the races. And basically they're going to be trying to replicate the feat in 2024, which is going to be very hard to do. They're, of course, because of the cost cap and the sliding arrow scales, they are going to have a little bit of a disadvantage, and they're going to have quite a few teams behind them. I do think the one concern for Red Bull going into 2024 is that if this kind of performance gap between Perez and Verstappen continues, and they have a very strong challenge from a Ferrari, a Mercedes, a McLaren, not Aston Martin, sorry Stroll, I don't think you're ever going to be strong enough that Aston will be able to mount any kind of challenge with you there. But if any of those 3 teams I mentioned previously, if they ever come out with a strong car that could seriously challenge Red Bull for a championship, and Perez kind of performs the way he did this year, I think Perez should be very nervous about his seat. And I do think Red Bull would be very quick to make a change if they felt that the Constructors or even the Drivers' Championship was at risk. So that's all for my review of Red Bull. That finishes the series looking at each of the 10 teams. I know these videos got very few views, but I'm not entirely surprised, given that it's winter break. Interest in F1 is low usually. But that being said, I still enjoy doing it. I still do it because I think it's important to have a record of that, so that in a year's time or 2 years' time you can go back and look and see. I could even go back and see what I thought about how a team was doing. I think, let's see, a couple more videos in the coming weeks until the new year. Not a whole lot of that going on. And then in January, of course, we have Formula E starting up, I think, second week of January. So that's going to be very exciting. I'm looking forward to that. So I'll be doing previews for that, of course. I might, if I have time, I might do the Formula Regional Middle Eastern Series. I know that runs in the winter, and you know, if I have time, of course, I can do reviews for that. What else? And then, of course, you know, you get into February, we get into car launches, and you know, very, very quickly we want to winter testing and the first race in Bahrain. So, you know, this is kind of the end of the, I guess, this series of videos for 2023. You know, I really enjoyed doing this first year, kind of doing YouTube. I know the channel not particularly successful, but you know, that's not a big deal to me. I enjoy doing it, so, and that's kind of most important. So, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.